Within a few minutes, their running footsteps had died away in the distance. Chauvelin listened to them for a moment. The promise of the reward was lending spurs to the soldiers of the Republic. The gleam of hate and anticipated triumph was once more apparent on his face. Close to him, Degas still stood mute and impassive, waiting for further orders, whilst two soldiers were kneeling beside the prostrate form of Marguerite. Overwrought nature had at last peremptorily asserted herself, and she lay there in a dead swoon. "It's no use mounting guard over a woman who's half dead," Chauvelin said spitefully to the soldiers, "when you've allowed 5 men who are very much alive to escape." Obediently the soldiers rose to their feet. "You'd better try and find that footpath again for me, and that broken-down cart we left on the road." Then suddenly a bright idea seemed to strike him. "And by the by, where's the Jew?" "Close by here, citoyen," said Degas. "I gagged him and tied his legs together, as you commanded." From the immediate vicinity, a plaintive moan reached Chauvelin's ears. He followed his secretary, who led the way to the other side of the hut, where, fallen into an absolute heap of dejection, with his legs tightly pinioned together and his mouth gagged, lay the unfortunate descendant of Israel. "Bring the cowardly brute here," commanded Chauvelin. He certainly felt exceedingly vicious, and since he had no reasonable grounds for venting his ill humour on the soldiers, who had but too punctually obeyed his orders, he felt that the son of the despised race would prove an excellent butt. With true French contempt for the Jew, which has survived the lapse of centuries even to this day, he would not go too near him, but said with biting sarcasm, as the wretched old man was brought in full light of the moon by the two soldiers, "I suppose now that being a Jew, you have a good memory for bargains. It was agreed between us that if we overtook my friend the tall stranger before he reached this place, you were to have 10 pieces of gold." A low moan escaped from the Jew's trembling lips. "But," added Chauvelin with slow emphasis, "if you deceived me in your promise, you were to have a sound beating, one that would teach you not to tell lies. Now, you did not fulfill your share of the bargain, but I am ready to fulfill mine. Here," he added, turning to the soldiers, "the buckle end of your 2 belts to this confounded Jew." He did not wait to see his orders carried out, but he turned and took a last look at the lonely bit of coast, where stood the wooden hut, now bathed in moonlight, the scene of the greatest discomfiture ever experienced by a leading member of the Committee of Public Safety. Against a rock, on a hard bed of stone, lay the unconscious figure of Marguerite Blakeney, while some few paces further on, the unfortunate Jew was receiving on his broad back the blows of 2 stout leather belts, wielded by the stolid arms of 2 sturdy soldiers of the Republic. The howls of Benjamin Rosenbaum were fit to make the dead rise from their graves. "That'll do," commanded Chauvelin, as the Jew's moans became more feeble and the poor wretch seemed to have fainted away. "We don't want to kill him." Obediently the soldiers buckled on their belts, one of them viciously kicking the Jew to one side. "Leave him there," said Chauvelin, "and lead the way now quickly to the cart. I'll follow." He walked up to where Marguerite lay and looked down into her face. She had evidently recovered consciousness and was making feeble efforts to raise herself. With mock gallantry, he stooped and raised her icy-cold hand to his lips, which sent a thrill of indescribable loathing through Marguerite's weary frame. "I must regret, fair lady," he said in his most suave tones, "that circumstances, over which I have no control, compel me to leave you here for the moment. But I go away, secure in the knowledge that I do not leave you unprotected. Our friend Benjamin here, though a trifle the worse for wear at the present moment, will prove a gallant defender of your fair person, I have no doubt. At dawn I will send an escort for you. Until then, I feel sure that you will find him devoted, though perhaps a trifle slow." Marguerite only had the strength to turn her head away. Her heart was broken with cruel anguish. One awful thought had returned to her mind, together with gathering consciousness. What had become of Percy? What of Armand? She knew nothing of what had happened after she had heard the cheerful song God Save the King, which she believed to be the signal of death. I myself, concluded Chauvelin, must now very reluctantly leave you. Au revoir, fair lady. We meet, I hope, soon in London. Shall I see you at the Prince of Wales's garden party? No? Oh, well. Au revoir. Remember me, I pray, to Sir Percy Blakeney. And with a last ironical smile and bow, he once more kissed her hand and disappeared down the footpath in the wake of the soldiers, and followed by the imperturbable Degas. Marguerite listened, half dazed as she was, to the fast-retreating, firm footsteps of the four men. Her brain only remained conscious of its ceaseless, its intolerable torture of uncertainty. She did not know. She did not know whether Percy was even now, at this moment, in the hands of the soldiers of the Republic, enduring, as she had done herself, the jibes and jeers of his malicious enemy. She did not know, on the other hand, whether Armand's lifeless body did not lie there in the hut, whilst Percy had escaped, only to hear that his wife's hands had guided the human bloodhounds to the murder of Armand and his friends. Suddenly, a sound. The strangest, undoubtedly, that these lonely cliffs of France had ever heard, broke the silent solemnity of the shore. It was the sound of a good, solid, absolutely British damn. Marguerite did not trust her ears. Half raising herself in her hands, she strained every sense to see or hear, to know the meaning of this very earthly sound. All was still again for the space of a few seconds. The same silence once more fell upon the great and lonely vastness. Then Marguerite, who had listened as in a trance, who felt that she must be dreaming with that cool, magnetic moonlight overhead, heard again, and this time her heart stood still. Her eyes, large and dilated, looked around her, not daring to trust to her other sense. "Odds life! But I wish those damned fellows had not hit quite so hard." This time it was quite unmistakable. Only one particular pair of essentially British lips could have uttered those words in sleepy, drawly, affected tones. "Damn!" repeated those same British lips emphatically. "Zooms! But I'm as weak as a rat." In a moment, Marguerite was on her feet. She looked round her eagerly at the tall cliffs, the lonely hut, the great stretch of rocky beach. Somewhere there, above or below her, behind a boulder or inside a crevice, but still hidden from her longing, feverish eyes, must be the owner of that voice, which once used to irritate her, but which now would make her the happiest woman in Europe, if only she could locate it. "Percy! Percy!" she shrieked hysterically, tortured between doubt and hope. "I am here! Come to me! Where are you? Percy! Percy!" "It's all very well calling me, my dear," said the same sleepy, drawly voice. "But odds my life, I cannot come to you. Those damned frog-eaters have trussed me like a goose on a spit, and I'm as weak as a mouse. I cannot get away." And still Marguerite did not understand. She did not realize for at least another 10 seconds whence came that voice, so drawly, so dear, but alas, with a strange accent of weakness and of suffering. There was no one within sight, except by that rock. Great God! The Jew? Was she mad? Or dreaming? His back was against the pale moonlight. He was half crouching, trying vainly to raise himself with his arms tightly pinioned. Marguerite ran up to him, took his head in both her hands, and looked straight into a pair of blue eyes, good-natured, even a trifle amused, shining out of the weird and distorted mask of the Jew. "Percy! Percy, my husband!" she gasped, faint with the fullness of her joy. "Thank God! Thank God!" "La, my dear," he rejoined good-naturedly. "We'll both do that anon, and you think you can loosen these damned ropes and release me from my inelegant attitude?" She had no knife. Her fingers were numb and weak, but she worked away with her teeth, while great welcome tears poured from her eyes onto those poor pinioned hands. "Odds life!" he said, when at last, after frantic efforts on her part, the ropes gave way. "But I marvel whether it has ever happened before that an English gentleman allowed himself to be licked by a damned foreigner and made no attempt to give as good as he got." And laughingly, he took off the disfiguring wig and curls and stretched out his long limbs, which were cramped after many hours stooping. Then he bent forward and looked long and searchingly into his wife's blue eyes. "Percy," she whispered, while a deep flush suffused her delicate cheeks and neck. "If you only knew." "I do know, dear." "Everything," he said with infinite gentleness. "Can you ever forgive?" "I have naught to forgive, sweetheart. Your heroism, your devotion, which I, alas, so little deserved, have more than atoned for that unfortunate episode at the ball." "Then you knew?" she whispered. "All the time?" "Yes," he replied tenderly. "I knew, all the time. But begad, had I but known what a noble heart yours was, my Margot, I should have trusted you as you deserved to be trusted. And you would have not had to undergo the terrible sufferings of the past few hours in order to run after a husband who has done so much that needs forgiveness." "But, Armand," she said, with sudden terror and remorse, as in the midst of her happiness the image of the beloved brother, for whose sake she had so deeply sinned, rose now before her mind. "Oh, have no fear for Armand, sweetheart," he said tenderly. "Did I not pledge you my word that he should be safe? He with de Tournay and the others are even now on board the Daydream. When I found that brute Chauvelin meant to stick to me like a leech, I thought the best thing I could do, as I could not shake him off, was to take him along with me. I had to get to Armand and the others somehow, and all the roads were patrolled and every one on the lookout for your humble servant. I knew that when I slipped through Chauvelin's fingers at the Chat Gris, that he would lie in wait for me here, whichever way I took. I wanted to keep an eye on him and his doings, and a British head is as good as a French one any day." "But if Chauvelin had discovered you," she gasped excitedly. "Your disguise was good, but he is so sharp." "Odds fish," he rejoined quietly. "Then certainly the game would have been up. I could but take the risk. I know human nature pretty well by now," he added, with a note of sadness in his cheery young voice. "And I know these Frenchmen out and out. Oh, they so loathe a Jew that they never come nearer than a couple of yards of him, and begad, I fancy that I contrive to make myself look about as loathsome an object as it's possible to conceive." "Yes, and then?" she asked eagerly. "Oh, zooks, well then I carried out my little plan. I reckoned on the blind obedience of the soldiers. Chauvelin had ordered them on pain of death not to stir until the tall Englishman came. And Degas had thrown me down in a heap quite close to the hut. The soldiers took no notice of the Jew who had driven Citoyen Chauvelin to this spot. I managed to free my hands from the ropes with which the brute had trussed me. I always carry pencil and paper with me wherever I go, and hastily scrawled a few important instructions on a scrap of paper. And then I looked about me. I crawled up to the hut, under the very noses of the soldiers, who lay under cover without stirring, just as Chauvelin had ordered them to do, and then I dropped my little note into the hut, through a chink in the wall, and waited. I waited for nearly half an hour. When I knew that the fugitives were safe, I gave the signal, which caused so much stir." And that was the whole story. It seemed so simple, and Marguerite could but marvel at the wonderful ingenuity, the boundless pluck and audacity which had evolved and helped to carry out this daring plan. Suddenly, however, she started. The happy blush left her cheek, the light of joy died out of her eyes. She had heard a stealthy footfall overhead, and a stone had rolled down from the top of the cliffs right down to the beach below. "What's that?" she whispered in horror and alarm. "Oh, nothing, my dear," he muttered with a pleasant laugh. Only a trifle you happen to have forgotten? My friend, folks. Sir Andrew, she gasped. Aye, you'd forgotten him, hadn't you, my dear? Said Sir Percy merrily. Fortunately, I met him not far from the Chat Gris before I had that interesting supper party with my friend Chauvelin. I told him of a very long, very roundabout road that will bring him here by a very circuitous road which Chauvelin's men would never suspect. Just about the time when we're ready for him. Eh, little woman? The next moment Sir Andrew rounded the rock against which Sir Percy and Marguerite were leaning, and seeing the weird figure clad in the long Jew's gabardine, he paused in sudden, complete bewilderment. But already Blakeney had struggled to his feet. "Here I am, friend," he said with his funny, inane laugh. "All alive, though I do look a begad scarecrow in these damned things." "Zooks!" ejaculated Sir Andrew in boundless astonishment as he recognized his leader. "Of all the—" The young man had seen Marguerite, and happily checked the forcible language that rose to his lips at sight of the exquisite Sir Percy in this weird and dirty garb. "Yes," said Blakeney calmly. "Of all the— But odds fish," he added with sudden earnestness and authority. "Now you're here, folks, we must lose no more time. That brute Chauvelin may send someone to look after us." Marguerite was so happy she could have stayed here forever, hearing his voice, asking 100 questions. But at mention of Chauvelin's name, she started in quick alarm, afraid for the dear life she would have died to save. "But how can we get back?" she gasped. "The roads are full of soldiers between here and Calais, and—" "We're not going back to Calais, sweetheart," he said, "but just the other side of Grenay, not half a league from here. The boat of the Daydream will meet us there." "The boat of the Daydream?" "Yes," he said with a merry laugh, "another little trick of mine. I should have told you before that when I slipped that note into the hut, I also added another for Armand, which I directed him to leave behind, and which has sent Chauvelin and his men running full tilt back to the Chat Gris, after me. But the first little note contained my real instructions, including those to old Briggs. He had my orders to go out further to sea and then towards the west. When well out of sight of Calais, he'll send the galley to a little creek he and I know of just beyond Grenay. The men will look out for me, we have a preconcerted signal, and we'll all be safely aboard, while Chauvelin and his men solemnly sit and watch the creek, which is just opposite the Chat Gris." "The other side of Grenay, but I cannot walk, Percy," she moaned helplessly as, trying to struggle to her tired feet, she found herself unable even to stand. "I will carry you, my dear," he said simply. "The blind leading the lame, you know." And his arms, still vigorous in spite of fatigue and suffering, closed round Marguerite's poor, weary body and lifted her as gently as if she'd been a feather. Then, as Sir Andrew discreetly kept out of earshot, there were many things said, or rather, whispered, which even the autumn breeze did not catch, for it had gone to rest. The many-hued light of dawn was breaking in the east when at last they reached the creek beyond Grenay. The galley lay in wait. In answer to a signal from Sir Percy, she drew near, and 2 sturdy British soldiers had the honour of carrying my lady into the boat. Half an hour later, they were on board the Daydream. Armand Saint-Just and the other fugitives were eagerly awaiting the advent of their brave rescuer. He would not stay to hear the expressions of their gratitude, but found his way to his private cabin as quickly as he could, leaving Marguerite quite happy in the arms of her brother. The rest is silence. Silence and joy for those who had endured so much suffering, yet found at last a great and lasting happiness. But it is on record that at the brilliant wedding of Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, Bart, with Mademoiselle Suzanne de Tournay de Basrive, a function at which His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales and all the elite of fashionable society were present, the most beautiful woman there was unquestionably Lady Blakeney, whilst the clothes Sir Percy Blakeney wore were the talk of the jeunesse dorée of London for many days. It is also a fact that Monsieur Chauvelin, the accredited agent of the French Republican government, was not present at that or any other social function in London after that memorable evening at Lord Grenville's ball.